Hello, Criminal Justice 100 students. This is David Taylor from the Effective Writing Center, and I'm here today to review this model paper that your professor has provided that illustrates one of the options that have been given to you for this assignment. Now, in reviewing this paper, you're going to be seeing not just the specifics of this particular option, but also you're going to be seeing the overall general characteristics that your professor would like to see whenever you submit your assignment for any of the four options that you've been given in this Criminal Justice 100 project. Okay, with no further ado, let's get started. Okay, the first thing you see is the title page in APA style. Let's go over a few of the characteristics of a title page in APA style. Up in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see that in the header area, which is accessed by placing your pointer and double-clicking, in this header area you see the APA style title page header. It consists of the word running, the word head, followed by a colon, and then a shortened version of your paper's title, not to exceed 50 characters, including spaces. In this case, the shortened title, in all caps, is State of the American Criminal Justice System, and then you put in a page number. Now, in the rest of the title page, you'll see that the professor has specified very detailed kind of information that she would like. And this includes the full title of your paper, the course, the project number, and which of the options that you have chosen. In this case, the student, name change here, John Doe, the student has chosen Practitioner Interview. Okay, let's go ahead and blow this up so that we can get a better view of it as we go through this paper. After the title page comes the beginning of the body of your paper. And one thing that you'll notice is that the running head has changed. On the second page and throughout the rest of the paper, the running head in APA has only the shortened title up at top, not the words running head. And then after that comes the actual title of the paper as it appears on your title page. And then after that comes some background material. And what the student is doing here is setting the background for the interview. And the paper reads, "The American criminal justice system is a large, complex structure with a number of unique challenges." So as you can see, the student begins very generally. "Overall, the system employs 2.3 million people at the federal, state, and local levels in 3 distinct areas." And then comes a colon, setting off a list at the end of the sentence. "The police force, the judicial and legal systems, and corrections." And here is an in-text citation. Now let's focus for just a minute on in-text citations in APA. The first thing to know is that all in-text citations in APA are formatted exactly the same. They consist of the author's last name, which in this case is Falk, followed by a comma and a space, and then the year of publication, which in this case is 2010. Now, if you're dealing with a source that does not list an author, then you simply put a version of the title of that source in quotation marks. But this source does have an author. Another thing I want you to notice is that the period goes after the citation. This is much more important than a mere punctuation matter. The fact that the period goes after the sentence indicates that that in-text citation belongs only to that sentence. That's right. Any sentence that contains source information, whether quoted or paraphrased or summarized, put into your own phrasing, must have an in-text citation. If it doesn't have an in-text citation, the reader assumes it is you, the author's words and work. Let's read the next sentence and you'll see another example of this. "In 2001, federal, state, and local governments spent $167 billion on police protection, legal and judicial services, and corrections, at an average cost of $586 per person. And now we have another in-text citation. In this case, it is BJS, Bureau of Justice Statistics, 2004. Again, notice the period goes after the citation. The citation refers only to the information in that sentence. Now, one other thing I want to point out about in-text citations. They are, as you have seen, abbreviated forms, author, year, or if you don't have an author, the title and year. Now, these in-text citations refer to the full and complete citation format on a page at the end of your paper entitled References. And here is that References page. So our first in-text citation was Falk. And here is the full and complete reference citation for Falk's book, Falk, G, period, 2010. There's the name of the book, and notice that in APA, source titles, even if they are books, source titles are following sentence punctuation style, which means only the first word is capitalized, as well as any proper noun such as American in this case, and any first word of a subtitle. Here you have a subtitle, colon, how it works, how it doesn't, how to fix it. And then the other citation was of the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and here is how you format a document published by the United States government. Let me stop here and say, in order to get your reference citations correct, it is very easy. Today we have very accurate citation machines. The one that is the most accurate and free is the Bedford Bibliographer. Now here is a link to the Bedford Bibliographer, and also here is a link to a video that shows you how to use the Bedford Bibliographer, which will print out for you all of your references in correct APA style, including Times New Roman font 12 point, and you can simply copy and paste it for your paper. That's a really big help. Now let's go back to our paper and continue reading. Now recall where we are and what we're doing. The student is setting the background in the opening paragraphs. Let's go to the second paragraph. The primary purpose of the criminal justice system is to protect and serve U.S. citizens by controlling crime, imposing penalties on offenders, and upholding the rights of victims. Very good. That is clearly from the student. These errors here, by the way, of spacing have to do with me copying it from one version of Word to another. So there was not an in-text citation in that sentence. Therefore, it is the student's own thoughts and words. And indeed, enrolled in this course, a student can be expected to know that. Next sentence. A number of researchers have published various opinions on the state of the American justice system. This paper, however, notice the transition to the thesis or the purpose statement for this paper. This paper, however, will focus on my interview with Officer T.E. Hardy, who was gracious enough to share his thoughts on the state of the U.S. criminal justice system. So, here we have an introduction section. It is set off by the main title at the top. It provides background material leading up to the statement of purpose of this project. Now notice what we have next. We have what is called an APA Level 1 subheading, Meet Officer Hardy. It is centered, it is bold-faced, and it is phrased like a title, Meet Officer Hardy. Now in this section, you can now expect to find what? Exactly what that subtitle told you you would find, some background material on Officer Hardy. But more important, these subheadings serve to divide up your paper and signal its organization to your reader, and that's why they are essential when writing an APA paper. Okay, let's read about Officer Hardy. Officer T.E. Hardy is a 26-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police Department in Washington, D.C. Officer Hardy is currently serving as Nuisance Property Officer and Community Outreach Officer for the Capitol Hill District. His duties include coordinating programs for seniors and teens, as well as mentoring teens on a regular basis. Over the years, he has served in different capacities with the D.C. Police Force. For example, Officer Hardy served for 10 years as McGruff the Crime Dog. McGruff the Crime Dog is an anthropomorphic cartoon bloodhound created by Saatchi & Saatchi, that's an advertising agency, through the Ad Council for the National Crime Prevention Council for use by American police in building crime awareness among children. Now you may ask yourself, why isn't there a citation for all of this? Well, there is a thing in writing called common knowledge, and that is whenever you see certain facts repeated over and over in more than one source, you can consider them to be common knowledge, knowledge that is shared by everyone who researches and writes in this particular discipline. This is background information on Officer Hardy. Let's continue with this background information. Officer Hardy has a great sense of humor. When relating his experience as Mr. McGruff, he smiled and said, "I am the Mr. McGruff who got punched by the Metro bus driver. Didn't you read it? It was in the newspapers and on the news. It was well covered by the media." End of quotation. So notice that the student does not hesitate in this interview option to quote directly from the sources. And this is true in any of the four options that you're given for this paper. The more that you quote directly, the more of a narrative flow the paper will have. During his career, continuing reading, Officer Hardy has delivered a baby while on duty, and in his first year as an officer, he received the top department award for arresting a murder suspect while he was off duty. For his dedicated years of service and innovative work in community policing, the U.S. Department of Justice awarded Officer Hardy with the, quote, Top Officer in the Country Award. He also assisted in the rewriting of the Partnership for Police Manual, which is used in police departments throughout the United States. Okay, so we have here 3 paragraphs of background material on Officer Hardy. These 3 paragraphs are clearly set off by the subheading Meet Officer Hardy and by the beginning of the next section, which is labeled Interview. And so now we clearly know that the writer, John Doe, is taking us into the interview portion of this paper. Here we go. I interviewed Officer Hardy on June 15, 2015. He was gracious enough to share his years of experience on the D.C. Police Force, as well as his thoughts on the criminal justice system in general. Due to the sensitive nature of his current position, Officer Hardy was careful with his responses, as he is still an active member of the police force. I assured him that his opinions would not be used in any way to jeopardize his career or position with the police department and the community. So as you can tell, this was what the student and Officer Hardy first talked about whenever they sat down. Our interview began with an exploration of his background, his reasons for joining the force, and ended with his thoughts on the current situation in the U.S. criminal justice system. Now notice how that sentence sets up what is to follow. What is to follow? You will see his A, background, his reasons for joining the force, and his thoughts on the current situation in the U.S. criminal justice system. You can clearly see that the paper will now be divided in exactly those sections. So do you see how the writer is constantly thinking about the reader and how he, the writer, can signal organization to the reader? Okay, background. Officer Hardy was interested in the law at an early age. His earliest influence was his next-door neighbor who was a police officer. At the age of 9, he was fascinated with his neighbor's uniform and the respect his neighbor received in the community. Officer Hardy has always had a desire to serve others. He joined the district's Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, on July 17, 1989, and has no regrets in joining the force. His passion for police work and serving the community is evident in his career achievements. Okay, there's the background that is established. Now we get his thoughts on the U.S. criminal justice system as signaled by, very clearly, the APA Level 1 subheading, Thoughts on the U.S. criminal justice system. Let's read. Regarding the criminal justice system, Officer Hardy firmly believes our system is one of the best in the world. However, he is quick to admit that the system does have quite a few challenges. He indicated two of the most important areas he feels need to be addressed in order to make the system function better. So, the student is narrating what happened during the interview. He is summarizing most of the narrative in his own words, and he is clearly signaling to his reader what the major topics were that were discussed. So we were just told that Officer Hardy feels that two areas are problematic, and notice what we now have. Area number 1, racism. Officer Hardy believes that racism can be found throughout the system. Officer Hardy stated. So notice that the student said, summarized in his own word what Officer Hardy said, and now the student quotes it exactly. The recent media accounts of police brutality and shootings of African Americans are clear indications of discrimination in the criminal justice system. Racism not only affects those involved, but the entire community as a whole. These incidents cause distrust and broken relationships between law enforcement agencies and the community. As an officer who works closely with the community, this is a very important issue to me. So clearly, the student did a very good job in setting up this critical quotation. Then comes the quotation from Officer Hardy expressing his full thoughts on this concern, and now look what happens. The student takes off on what Officer Hardy said and brings sources to bear to further explain, expand, and cooperate exactly what Officer Hardy says. For example, the student says, Professor Brewer of the University of Minnesota and Professor Heitzig agree with Officer Hardy in his assessment of racism throughout the U.S. criminal justice system. According to the professors, and now we have a quote from a source, the criminal justice system provides a convenient vehicle for physically maintaining the old legally enforced color lines, as African Americans are disproportionately policed, prosecuted, convicted, disenfranchised, and imprisoned, end quote. In-text citation, Brewer and Heitzig, 2008. And again, that's my program that caused that space not to be there. So notice that the in-text citation comes after the quotation. Notice that the in-text citation is within the sentence, as signaled by the fact that the period comes after the quotation. And also notice that the in-text citation is an abbreviation of the full and complete reference citation at the end of the paper. Let's go there. And there they are, Brewer, R.M., and Heitzig, N.A., and there is the title of the source, the article, The Racialization of Crime and Punishment. Notice only the first word is capitalized. Colon, notice that the word after the colon is capitalized. Criminal justice, colorblind racism, and the political economy of the prison industrial complex. There is the journal in which it was published. There's the volume number. No issue number is needed because this is a journal paginated consecutively. And then there is the retrieval information. In this case, it is a DOI. Okay, again, the Bedford bibliographer will show you exactly how to format any reference, any source that you come upon. Let's go back to reading the paper. The student follows the Brewer and Heitzig source with another source that further confirms what Officer Hardy said. And here it is. The following report from the Death Penalty Information Center lends credence to the problem of racism in the U.S. criminal justice system. Now notice that this is a quote that is set off. In APA, whenever you have a quote that consists of more than 40 words, it is set off, it is further indented a half inch, and it does not have quote marks. And so that's why you do not see quote marks in this quotation. Here's the quotation. In January 1990, Clarence Brandley was released after spending nearly a decade on Texas's death row for a crime he did not commit. The misconduct in that case involved every level of government, from the police who threatened witnesses to prevent them from testifying to Brandley, to the trial judge and the prosecutor who held secret meetings to rehearse objections and rulings, to the state attorney general, and as you see, the quote goes on for quite a long time, presenting the whole kind of sordid episode. But notice at the end, whenever you have a quotation that is more than 40 words and is set off, notice that the in-text citation in the APA goes outside the period and that there are no quotation marks. Okay, now that the student, John Doe, has presented one of Officer Hardy's main opinions and then further elaborated on those opinions by bringing in sources, the student then goes back to the interview with Officer Hardy in a narrative format. And here we are, Area 2, Ethics. Officer Hardy feels there are individuals who corrupt the legal system and interfere with due process. In particular, some defense attorneys and prosecutors manipulate the system and the Fifth and 14th Amendments to their benefit by circumventing fair trials with plea bargaining agreements and disregarding the outcome for the offender and the victim. And then we have a further corroboration of Officer Hardy's opinion from the Kroll article that has already been cited. Now, this is an in-text citation here. It looks a little different than the other in-text citations because, one, the author's name goes outside the parentheses, and that's because the author's name is being used as part of the student's own writing, part of the student's own sentence. In this case, it's a prepositional phrase from the Kroll 1992 article. So whenever you use the author's name as part of your sentence, it plays a role, then it goes outside the parentheses. Then, once again, we have a more than 40-word quotation, and therefore it is set off a further, an additional ½ inch. Then, the student brings in another source to further corroborate, and indeed writes this sentence. Other experts agree with Officer Hardy. In other words, the student is doing something very important. The student is writing in such a way as to integrate the source material with his interview with Officer Hardy. So we are reminded that once again we are discussing Officer Hardy's opinion. The source is introduced in their article, Criminal Justice Ethics. Worley and Barua 2015 state, here's another example of an in-text citation in which the author's names are being used in the student's sentence and therefore do not appear inside the parentheses. State, followed by a colon, sets off another long indented quotation. And there it is. So the student has corroborated what Officer Hardy has said by bringing in sources. We go back to the narrative of the interview. We pick back up. When asked of if the system works, Officer Hardy stated, "The system works as best as it can under the circumstances. If all law enforcement parties in the criminal justice system followed the provisions of the U.S. Constitution, the system would work much better than it does today." End of quote. Notice that after that quotation from Officer Hardy, the student then goes into an explanation or further elaboration of what Officer Hardy says. Here it is. Officer Hardy was referring to the Fifth and 14th Amendments. The Constitution states only one command twice. The Fifth Amendment says to the federal government that no one, quote, shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868, uses the same 11 words called the Due Process Clause to describe a legal obligation of all states. Now we have a source that is used along with the student's own words and thoughts. These words have as their central promise an assurance that all levels of American government must operate within the law, quote, legality, and provide fair procedures. And we know that this last sentence, the information in it, is from a source called DeRoche, 2012. We know that this in-text citation applies only to this sentence right here. Everything up to that was the student's own understanding of the Constitution and the Fifth Amendments, which he obviously can read himself. And then there is an interpretation of it, a further emphasis on the idea of constitutional legality from a source called DeRoche. And this abbreviated source, DeRoche 2012, refers to the full and complete citation in the references page at the end of the paper. And there it is, DeRoche C 2012. Okay, let's finish up. The student very cleverly goes back to the narrative. Officer Hardy agrees, which introduces the quote, until measures are put in place to uphold the provisions outlined in the U.S. Constitution and parties are made accountable for their actions, the system will not operate as it was intended. Now comes the final section of the paper, which are the student's own reflections on the interview, which serve as a conclusion to this paper. And then following that conclusion, that reflection section, which is very clearly marked by an APA Level 1 subheading, then comes the last page of your paper, set off on a page all by themselves, the references. Okay, that concludes our review of this model paper. I hope that it is helpful to you as you choose one of the options given to you. Go out and have this experience. Come back and write it in narrative form. But as you're writing it in narrative form, don't forget to bring in sources to back up what is being discussed. Okay, thank you very much, and I will talk to you later.